Hi everybody, my name's Kevin Surman, and welcome to my New York and Long Branch inspired model railroad. HO scale railroad. I've been working on this for the last, probably 30 some years. Layout's changed a lot since I originally started building this. Joining the National Model Railroad Association, meeting a bunch of people in the area showed me all kinds of things, how to do track work and civil and wiring and everything else. So this is definitely not the layout I started with. And even now I'm still doing changes. So like I mentioned, the railroad's inspired by the New York and Long Branch Railroad, which was a paper railroad that ran down along the Jersey Shore. It was operated by both the Pennsylvania Railroad and Central Railroad of New Jersey. The CNJ, the Pennsylvania Railroad handled the books, the CNJ did all the maintenance. The locals were originally run by both railroads and then later on contracted strictly through the CNJ, through the Central Railroad of New Jersey. So even though both railroads could run on the railroad, constructive switching could only be done by an official New York and Long Branch train. So that makes this whole thing kind of interesting. I get to run two different railroads. I get to operate this under CNJ signals. There was Central Railroad of New Jersey branches kind of on and off this. Pennsylvania branched off different places, and there was a connection with the Raritan River Railroad in South Amboy. So when you first enter the basement is my version of Heramus Cove. And that started really with a gift of a tugboat and a barge from the late Henry Probst. So that was given to me from part of his estate. Henry was a local modeler, just a great individual. And I just had I'd have a real showcase place to put that. So this entire scene started with that barge and tugboat. The backdrop is a cheap Amazon poster. If you notice, it's that black and white with that kind of green tint. I think I got two of them together for maybe $30. I cut it apart and I said, I think I can make this work. And even though it's not color, the period is correct. So I carried those same greens into the foreground, and I think it works. The building in front there, it's inspired by a Foscale kit. That's the kit I really wanted to use, but I just didn't have enough room. So I took some liberty, and it's definitely modeled after their structure. The building on the side is some Bachman buildings that I kit bashed. And that's supposed to represent the Colgate Palmolive with the signature clock. Right now that factory's gone, but the clock is still there on the Hudson River. You can see that when you're over in the city looking across the river. So that's the newer parts of the layout. And then what I'm going to do is the layout's still in transition. I've modeled Newark, New Jersey, and I'm actually going to change that all to Heramus Cove. So the railroad starts basically at the Hudson River, milepost 0, and I go down as far as Red Bank. My far end staging is Bay Head. So I have Newark, and I have Greenville Yard, which is eventually going to be replaced with Heramus Cove. The real Greenville Yard would be about 4 or 5 times the size of my basement, and it's just a huge, huge facility. Too big for what my space, but I think Heramus Cove is going to be a much nicer fit. So I'm under construction right now. You can kind of see where I took the old turntable out. I'm building a new engine facility. So the railroad's definitely under construction and in transition. So these two areas that you kind of first see are really going to be replaced and redone. I put a piece of plywood in just so we don't dump anything into the turntable pit that's now covered up. So we leave the Newark section, and then we start heading south. The Newark section is actually built as Jersey City right now. I have Waldo interlocking. I am going to build the Meadows engine terminal, and you can kind of see the start of that. I got a turntable, I have the beginning of the roundhouse and an engine house. At this point, the railroad is double track main line. I am going to have operating overhead catenary in it. So I'm just starting to work on this section also. So this is a section I started about a year ago, but we are up and running on this part. So So the main line kind of goes through this little workshop space. We go under a not under. Okay. And then through that back wall. Okay. We end up in Woodbridge, which is kind of under construction right now. So I have Woodbridge, which on the rear railroad was where the Pennsylvania Railroad and the C&J came together, and really the beginning of the New York and Long Branch. I'm doing a branch from this point, which is going to be the Camden and Amboy branch. But all this you see in front of you is still kind of in transition. We leave Woodbridge, we go into Perth Amboy. Perth Amboy is a heavily industrial area. The station was in a cut, and I'm still scratch building that building right now. So I finally got the drawings for it, but that's a future project that I'm working on. We leave Perth Amboy and we head south. Between Perth Amboy and South Amboy, we went across the Raritan River. There was a large bridge. I don't model that. So we just leave Perth Amboy. I go through a shop space, and then I come out on the other side. In South Amboy, I have the interchange with the Raritan River Railroad. I got some more industry than that would have originally been there. I do model the road crossings. Interesting part about this part of town is if the railroad blocked both of the road crossings, there was no way for emergency vehicles to get to the far side of town because it was up against the Raritan Bay. So what happened is the railroad actually had to build an overpass, and that was Bordentown. They built that overpass so emergency vehicles could get across if trains were blocking both road crossings. And that actually happened a lot. There was really long trains of ilmenite ore from upstate New York, and that would end up in South Amboy, interchange to the Raritan River Railroad, and off to the National Lead Plant. Structures on the building, or structures on the layout, it's a little bit of everything. There are kits, there are structures that I scratch built, there are buildings that I got from other people, you name it. Everything and anything. And a lot of things I'm inspired. But we'll get back to structures a little bit after we finish the layout tour. Leaving South Amboy, the rear railroad was double tracked. I am single track for now, but that's also another future project. One of my favorite parts of the hobby is operations. And this is a real bottleneck. I originally did it so it would be a little more interesting operating, and it's a little too much of a bottleneck. So I'm actually going to replace part of this and actually make it double track all the way to Matawan. Leaving South Amboy, you see the Raritan River Railroad engine facility. So I got a little manual turntable in here, scratch-built coaling facility. The rear Raritan River Railroad, the roundhouse was gorgeous. I think it was like a 9 or 10 stall roundhouse. So for the size of the railroad, every single engine they had could actually be stored inside. The other thing interesting with the Raritan River is their coaling facility. They had a Fairbanks Morse coaling tower where they could actually dump coal from the car directly into the chute because they had all the time in the world to load their tenders. It's not like they had to load them quick and get them out. This was done at the end of the day. I found the drawing for it and I scratch built that. The other thing you kind of notice is one of the signature pieces is there's a rail bus that was actually part of Dick Elwell's collection. So that's kind of a signature piece, is this little rail bus there, and kind of remind me of the time spending with Dick. So we leave South Amboy. We go through the town of Morgan. Morgan was a tiny little hamlet with tiny little houses, kind of along the Raritan Bay. And then we go across the Cheesequake Creek Inlet. So that really did have a double track bascule lift bridge. And years ago, I had the RPI club up, and one of the students was a civil engineering student, and he looks at the bridge for a minute and he goes, "That's going to fall over," because there's no way that would actually be able to stand. And I didn't really give it much thought until then, because I really copied it from the original AHM and Polo Kid and everybody else that made it. But then after that, it bothered me, and I built another one on the other side that just, is prototypical. So that is actually another bridge that's going to eventually get replaced. We go across Cheesequake Inlet. We have the little town of Cliffwood. And again, tiny little town. I'm still single track, but the railroad was double track. And then we go across Matawan Creek. Now, Matawan Creek is interesting for two different reasons. Back in 1916, there were a bull shark that actually swam up this little tiny creek, which is maybe 25, 30 foot wide at the widest point, and actually attacked some kids, killed some kids. One of the adults jumped in, he was attacked, and really the onus for the book Jaws was from the shark attacks that happened on the Jersey Shore back in 1916. And then years after that, not long after the wreck of the Broker, there was a wooden trestle across this creek. That trestle caught on fire. The residents of New Jersey were in arms saying, you're not going to do another temporary thing, because they just had a wreck, less than a year before where a lot of people died. So the railroads actually did this, and I think in about 30, 40 days, brought fill in and actually got the railroad up and running again. So instead of a temporary trestle, they actually did a fill, and now it's just a little porthole going through that area. And then the pylons you see is the remains of that burnt trestle that kind of show at, at low tide. After Matawan Creek is the town of Matawan. The town of Matawan is where the Central Railroad of New Jersey branched off. There was the Seashore branch, which ran out over to Sandy Hook, Atlantic Highlands and Sandy Hook, and then the other line actually went over to Freehold, and that was where the carpet mill was. And the inspiration for Bruce Springsteen's song, My Hometown, it was actually about the carpet mill that actually went out of business. And I, capture all of that here in Matawan. Leaving Matawan, we then go into the helix, and I got about 60, 70 feet of track that actually circle around a furnace. We leave Matawan, and then once we reach the upper level, we're actually going the opposite direction. Now, the other thing is when I first started building this layout, it was only designed as a single level layout, and I wanted it up higher. But I got to Matawan, and I ran out of space, and I wasn't done building a railroad. So I actually built the second level on top of the finished first floor level. So I don't recommend it, but it's just what I ended up doing. So I leave Matawan, and then I actually come up here to this upper section here. And that was originally Atlantic Highlands branch, but then I turned that into the main line. And again, some of these structures up here are scratch built, some were from other people. Here's the full gamut up here. Some of the buildings are mementos from people that, my close friends that are no longer with us, or people that got out of the hobby. So, not everything here I built, some are from other people. So we leave Atlantic Highlands. Leaving Atlantic Highlands, I have both the main line and the passing track. This was the end of the old branch. This is where I started building that second level over everything. So the first thing is, it's awful high. So I actually had to bring the layout down a little bit. So I was able to do that, a little bit less than a 2% grade here. And I also needed to keep the upper level as thin as possible to get it as low as possible. So to do that, what I did is I used 3/4 inch plywood. I did a metal edging on the outside, which is an electrical product. It's a wire mold part. I have LED tape lighting on the inside. And I also have metal brackets that are actually cantilevered off the wall to hold this all up. So then we work our way down the grade. I go from my passing track to a single track again. I go across the Navesink Inlet. You can see a more prototypical Basco lift bridge with the appropriate concrete and everything. And then the background for that is actually from Google Earth. Building a large layout and trying to stretch every dollar. I look a lot of times trying to find images that would work. So I capture that from Google Earth. Try to just kind of cover anything that's a little too modern. Put that in the background and then try bringing those same colors in. That's actually from just north of Cape May along the Jersey Shore. But I was able to take those same colors from that waterfront and bring it through this. This is rippled plexiglass. Being an impatient modeler, I like using that because what I do is I paint the plywood first, then I paint the underside of the rippled plexiglass, kind of smash it all together, and it really takes abuse. It's a great spot to put, a cup of coffee. It cleans easy with some Windex. And I think it looks pretty good. And I don't have to worry about all the pouring the resins and everything else. Leaving Seabright, we then go through the shop space again. And then I end up in Hazlitt. In Hazlitt, I have the American Can Company Glassworks, which later on became Midland Glass, and then eventually went out of business. They could never get the electrical rate down where it was really profitable. So you had this huge factory for making glass. They would bring sand from the lower part of New Jersey up to here. Take that sand, take recycled glass, and they would send out finished products. And then in later years, what they did is the C&J got a bunch of the Lehigh, New England hopper carts, and they were using that for sand service. So I represent a lot of that here. We leave Hazlitt, we go through the wall again, single track. We end up in Middletown. This is an area where I kind of hide some of my better, for a little while I got into doing high-end scratch-built structures. So I've scratch-built this gas station, the other little building, and Hudson's there. They're 100% scratch-built, which I entered into contest. And then same thing with that bridge back there. They're all 100% scratch-built structures. So they're kind of tucked up here and out of the way. The backdrop here is from one of the commercial backdrop companies. It was actually in Mountain Lake. I cut the top of it off, and I think it actually worked out pretty good. It looks like you're looking at kind of out that Raritan Bay area. You see some little black marks in the background, which I tell everybody is kind of seagulls and birds. What that really is, when I was putting down my static grass, I didn't have a static grass applicator, so I borrowed a high pot tester from work. So I was actually doing this around 9,000 volts with my lineman gloves, and I didn't realize I was using a T-strainer, and I was actually arcing to the aluminum backdrop. So that's what those little black marks are. That's actually little arc marks, but they're my birds. So, but it was a neat way to do static grass because it really does stand up. I mean, it really does. It pops. So then we leave Middletown, and then we finally end up in the town of Red Bank. So Red Bank is where the CNJ, the Central Railroad of New Jersey, branched off for the Southern Division. The New York and Long Branch continued down to Bayhead. So I do have that interchange. I have the Sigmund Eisner factory there, and originally they made World War I uniforms for the Army. Then later on they started making Boy Scout uniforms. That's where all the uniforms were made till, I don't know, 40 years ago. So I have that factory building back there. Again, full gamut. There's some kits, there's, you name it, scratch built stuff. It's all kind of mixed in, whatever I think would fit in best. So the double track line goes through the wall and it goes into staging. The track in front of you represents the Red Bank Yard and then the CNJ line down to Atlantic City. We'll just finish this upper section, then we'll go back and just do this branch line. So this is the line down to Atlantic City. Well, what happened later on, Henry Propst, local New York Central modeler, just one of the nicest people you can meet, and a true gentleman. He passed away, and then this power plant was salvaged by his layout by the late Bill Doyle. So this was part of Bill Doyle's collection. He wanted to incorporate it in his layout, and he never had a chance to. So I was asked if I wanted this. I said, sure, let me see if I can do something with it. So I brought it home, and I actually had it the other direction, and it didn't work. So I flipped it around, and I go, boy, I can really make this work. So even though this really isn't New York and Long Branch, it's a memento, and it actually works really neat in the operating sessions. You know, we run a coal train down here. We drop down loads, we pick up empties, and I'm, you know, working on incorporating this all into the layout. So, not true southern New Jersey, but still just a neat touch. There's the Camden and Amboy branch. This really came down farther, but this used to be my main line, and I extended my main line and took a door and a wall out. So I wanted to do something, a little switching operation. So the first thing is we come out, we go across South River, which is my hometown in New Jersey originally. And then we just kind of work our way, you know, south. Again, some buildings that, you know, some kit bash, some kits, some stuff I got from other people. You know, you name it, there's a full gamut of stuff in here. So what makes this a neat part of the layout is that I can actually operate this section or not operate it during an operating session. So someone can come over here and switch this or not run it. So for controls, I use MRC DCC system. I try doing at least a monthly operating session. It works really well. I've had as many as 14 people, but 8 to 10 is probably the perfect number for this. The upper part of the layout is operating signals with relay logic. So I used the CNJ, actually had interlocking and ABS signals. CNJ would have been 3/3/3 or 3/2 offset. That is a ton of wiring. So I do something a little bit different. I just do 3/2. It's just a lot simpler, and I'm really happy when people just don't run through an absolute stop. If I can just get that every operating session, I'm happy. Well, thank you very much for spending a little time and visiting with me and my New York and Long Branch Railroad. Being a NMRA member and part of the Northeast region has been just fantastic for me. You meet the nicest people who take the time to show you how to do things and tricks and techniques. Very supportive. Yeah, it's a great group. So it really, it's a lot more than just the trains. It's a lot of the people you meet. Thanks.